In Mostar, as an old guidebook says, the European and Oriental worlds meet. Diversified ethnic groups live together, peaceful and tolerant, always accepting the other's religion. Now, it's in ruins. In 2 wars with hate and violence, the old Mostar has been destroyed. Serb, Croat or Muslim, it doesn't matter. We are all Mostarians after all. That's what people said in former times. But after the war between the brothers, Mostar is divided, and the old Turkish bridge, the Stari Most, symbol of a multicultural city, doesn't exist anymore. 0 hour in Mostar. Destruction everywhere. First Croats and Muslims fought together against the Serbs, then everyone against everyone else. The outcome, 2,000 dead, thousands of wounded and expelled people, the center of the city and a dozen villages destroyed, the Serb population gone. Flashback, 23rd of July, 94. The German politician Hans Koschnick takes up his position as administrator. His political mission from the European Union, the reunification of the city. The EU administration takes over in the city of Mostar. Its headquarters is directly on the confrontation line in the Croat part, in the Aero Hotel, still surrounded by towering barricades and ramparts. The presidents of Croatia and Bosnia, who had the political power, had to bow to the UN and EU, so the mandate means compromise, not friendship. The Croat and Muslim mayors become the administrators' real partners in the negotiations. It will soon be apparent that their signatures are one thing, but that the realization of the agreements is another. The European Union police are the most important pillar for the political mandate of the EU mission. Their mission, to guarantee public security and freedom of movement by establishing a united police for both parts of the city. But at times the lack of executive power renders them helpless. The first steps taken across the makeshift bridge serving in place of the destroyed Stari Most raise great hopes, as here in East Mostar, which is almost exclusively inhabited by Muslims. After the misery, nobody in Mostar wants to fight again, but only 18 months later, during Carnival, Koschnick's opponents set fire to a doll, a Koschnick lookalike. Then and now, hate has tended to block the way towards a fair peace. In July 94, the beginning of the mission, Mostar is a divided city. UN soldiers patrol along the former confrontation line. Few people dare to walk in the street. In spite of the agreed demilitarization, armed soldiers still eye each other everywhere. In 94, human despair was compounded by the daily fight for survival. Whole valleys look like this. The water and power supplies are ruined. Practically no habitable houses left. There are lethal mines everywhere. Living in a hole in a neglected backyard. They have had to bear this for 9 months already. The health system has collapsed. Hospitals are destroyed. There is no hope of improvement without help from outside. Their nerves are frayed. Many people can't bear it and commit suicide. My life is not worth anything, says this Muslim woman whose husband was killed in the fighting. We live like cave dwellers here, like mice. In the past we had friends everywhere. My sister was married to an Orthodox Christian, my brother to a Croat. Nobody cared. Only human beings were important. Mostar, in the days of the EU mission. The destruction of the bridges over the Neretva has wiped out the idea of the old Mostar, but a new mutual life for the people must be found. After 2 years of EU crisis management, it's at least possible to live next to one another, and with the help of other organizations, it's possible to survive. Mashed potatoes with sauce, a meal for thousands of people every day, especially in the enclosed eastern part of Mostar where neither money nor supplies any longer exist. This was one of the emergency aid programs of the EU administration. Finding clean water at one of the few temporary water points was one of the Mostarians' greatest problems. So the reconstruction of the water and power supplies, especially in the destroyed old town, was one of the immediate steps taken by the EU. For 2 winters, it provided wood and oil for thousands of people, distributed it to schools, authorities, companies. But there were always complaints by some Muslims and Croats that the distribution was not fair. Without the reconstruction of bridges, the parts of the city stay separated, and without the reconstruction of the roads, there is no fresh start for the economy. Here, Croats and Muslims work together on the construction of Zrinski Bridge, following the principle, money from the EU, but companies and manpower from the region, which is also applied to the reconstruction of houses and factories. Companies like this, which no longer have any clients, naturally ask, what will happen to us after the mission? War has left little for private traders or companies. Help for self-help by providing materials is the aim, but without long-term loans after the EU mission it will disappear. The same problem dominates long-term restoration of the health system. A container hospital like this one can only be a temporary solution. The reconstruction of nearly 24 schools is intended to get children and young people off the streets, because here they learn things other than violence and trouble. Their parents have already lost everything. Without education, the children will also be losers. A checkpoint, a UN vehicle, waiting people. In spite of peace, this checkpoint remains a symbol of the division until the end of '95 for those people who were separated by the war. East meets West, but only minutes are allowed. Only 250 people from each side are permitted to visit the other part of the city each day, but only old people, women, children. The EU administration desperately tries to increase the numbers, but the Croats refuse any increase. Their resistance ended only last December, and now there are no restrictions on the numbers. The return of all refugees to their housing, one of the mandate's prime aims, has not yet been accomplished. Local authorities prevent the return of other ethnic groups, and people forced to live in temporary accommodation often think, what are we supposed to do here? By 1996, the European Union in the Eero Hotel had achieved a great deal, but had also suffered setbacks. At the daily morning meeting, the checkered troop from all over Europe coordinates the work in the diplomatic minefield of Mostar. politicians, administrators, reconstruction workers and police. Only the exchange of information between these colleagues, but also with I4 and humanitarian organizations, gets results. But a lack of readiness to cooperate by the parties to the conflict quite often turns this into a crisis meeting. Rick's Cafe is what the European helpers call the cafe bar of the administration, which is certainly a lot more than just an ordinary cafe. It's a meeting place for the exchange of information, for example for Croat and Muslim policemen, who otherwise have little private contact. Peacemakers and war criminals, war victims and profiteers often sit directly next to each other. This can have a positive effect, but it's also an open secret that members of the EU are at risk of being tapped by the wrong people. Only in the last few months have European police officers patrolled together with Muslim and Croat police in the city. This kind of cooperation was called for much earlier by the mandate and the Dayton Agreement. And it was also agreed that it's not only a matter of simply defusing the occasional grenade, but applies to the entire work of the police. But such joint policing is still an illusion. The Croats are particularly obstructive, with negative consequences. Shots in Mostar on the 7th of February 96. Outraged Croat nationalists and others hold up the administrator's car and threaten to kill him. "You dirty swine! Look what the Muslims have done to me!" one of them shouts. Another one calls out, "Yes, film this! Let everybody see it!" The demonstrators are encouraged by their mayor, who had revoked his cooperation with the EU administrator that morning. The reason? Hans Koschnik's decision on the establishment of the future administrative districts of a reunified Mostar. "What do you want? You there, go away. What do you want? Koschnik is an idiot." The European police are powerless. Their mandate does not permit intervention. Provocative idleness on the part of the Croat police. They do nothing to protect their European colleagues and Hans Koschnik. Cooperation with the Croats becomes a farce. It's more than an hour before Hans Koschnik can escape. Afterwards, he makes an appeal for reason. We are the substance of life in Europe. We, the European people, living next to each other with our own identities, our own cultures. But we also have common values. We don't want a melting pot. And I can understand that the Croats want to retain their own identity. Yes, they must, and the Bosniaks must too. But that doesn't mean that I hate the other man and bash him on the head. No, it's just the opposite. I want to be able to live with my own culture and for you to do the same. Only 2 weeks later, the last checkpoint on the boulevard is being pulled down. The Croat leadership has finally accepted the freedom of movement that was promised to everyone, also men, a long time ago. But the price that has to be paid for this is too high for Hans Koschnik, because the EU countries have changed the frontiers of the administrative districts in Mostar in favor of the Croats and left the Croat leaders of the attack unpunished. The German administrator resigns. But the EU mission in Mostar continues. Hans Koschnik's successor, the Spanish politician Ricard Pérez Casado, is in office. His main task is to implement the municipal elections agreed to by the Croats and Muslims. For a peaceful future for Mostar can only be built on the basis of a new administration legitimized by the population. Faith has been the basis for the survival of many people in Mostar, and now also offers a chance of forgiveness. But apart from radical nationalism, religious fanaticism was also one of the driving forces on all sides of the conflict. The EU still adheres to its multi-ethnical concept, hoping that the desire for real peace can grow in people's minds. The administration therefore not only struggles to establish a new form of cooperation, but also fights the apparently unshakable conviction of many people here that they were exclusively victims and never culprits, that it was always the others who caused the suffering.